We have a couple of very special guests joining us in studio right now. First of all, on the left-hand side of your screen, Representative, State Representative Zach Nunn joining us. Thanks for being here again. And along with Zach is Tiffany Allison. We had a chance to visit with you last April, if I'm not mistaken.
We did.
And I had a chance to tell your story, which really I had got a lot of talk, Jackie. People talked about that for months.
It's a powerful story and one we want to talk about again this morning because we were trying to get some legislation through, but we're needing to do it again. We're going to talk about that in a second, but remind everybody your story.
Sure. In 2009, I became the victim of violent crime through domestic violence. My abuser took me hostage in my home for 4.5 hours and beat me using his hands, knees, and feet. He broke a wrought iron cross across my body, bit me, knocked me unconscious twice, the first time through strangulation, the second time through hitting my head up against a hardwood stair, and urinated on me. And I was lucky to escape the house. And when I was going through the court process, I found out that I was his 5th victim.
Wow.
He was sentenced to 2.5 years, but only served 10 months due to sentence reduction programming in Iowa. And then 12 months after his release, he reoffended with another woman.
Wow.
So obviously some rules or laws need to be changed to make sure something like this doesn't happen again.
Yes,
and you're very brave to tell your story. And we were trying last year to get some legislation through, and we're trying again.
Yep, absolutely. So Tiffany's story, sadly, is the story shared by thousands of Iowans. I mean, the reality here is that as we in the House and in the Senate, I think, work on a very bipartisan level to look at good judiciary reform, we also need to be looking at what are we doing for the survivor and for the victims in these situations to make sure that, one, it doesn't happen again, but that truth in sentencing really is something that can happen. In Tiffany's case, sadly, her offender went to prison for 3 years, or was sentenced to prison for 3 years, and within 10 months was back out on the street. During which time he immediately reoffended again, attacked a 6th victim, sentenced to 15 years, and at this point it's looking like will serve due to good behavior less than 3 years in actual confinement.
So they're not behind bars yet.
No, well, they're sentenced to be behind bars, but they end up getting out early.
Even with all these previous offenses.
Absolutely. And so when we talk about mandatory minimums, I think there are a lot of people who rightly push back and say, you know, it doesn't stop the low-level drug offender to be in prison for 10 years. However, when you have a habitual offender who's someone who is violent, who has shown a propensity to go after somebody 6 separate times and attack very violently, leaving permanent scars on people's bodies, and not to mention the mental anguish that they go through, there has to be a legitimate conversation about what are we doing to prevent, rehabilitate, and at certain times punish those individuals.
So where are we at right now with this legislation?
I guess I'm happy to highlight that through Tiffany's effort and groups like this, the Department of Corrections, along with Department of Public Safety and the Governor's Office, have put forward an initiative. It's House File 2399. I was fortunate enough to get to lead it through the House, and we had really spirited debate on the floor, and it passed overwhelmingly by both Democrats and Republicans.
What was the biggest opposition to this?
So I think there are a couple of challenges here. One is the idea that putting people in prison is going to solve the problem. The mandatory minimum is an issue that consistently comes up, particularly from my colleagues on the Democratic side. The mandatory minimums are not something we want to get into. The expense issue comes up from both sides. As we highlighted, I think overwhelmingly there are a number of individuals who, until they have shown real rehabilitation, not just that they can get along in a prison setting, beating on your wife or your spouse or in front of your children is one thing in a home where you feel like you can get away with that.
Right.
Bad behavior in prison is immediately corrected by guys who are probably a lot stronger than you and don't deal with guys who beat on their wives.
Right.
So as a result, their parole officers or their parole board see it and they're like, well, this guy's been a model prisoner the entire time he's here. An 18-month early release is something that we'd be willing to do, which unfortunately allows that offender to get right back out on the street and has a habit of reattacking the
which has been proven, obviously.
Absolutely.
I mean, even with your personal story. So how are you feeling about this? Are you encouraged by what's happening?
I am. I was delighted to see the response in the House vote. Now it's going to be turned over to the Senate, so we're hopeful that people will contact their local senators and let them know that they support this legislation and urge their senators to support it. But we're just kind of waiting to see what will happen, and we're working really hard to let them know that this is an important issue and the public supports it.
No, it's really important that you were able to speak up about what happened and then try to do something about it. How many other people have stepped up to you and said, thank you for doing this?
I've had overwhelming response on social media of people calling me, texting, sending tweets and emails saying thank you. But we also had a lot of survivors come up to the Capitol to voice their support for the legislation and talk to their local senators. And it's so important that they see that this is actually what victims and survivors want.
That is important.
Yes, absolutely it is.
Speak up.
Yeah, and it's not an easy thing to do.
And Jackie, Lou, let me also highlight, in Tiffany's story, we have had good bipartisan support in the Senate. Senator Saunders has been leading this bill, helped kept it alive through Funnel Week. And really what we're going to focus on is three aspects of this. One, we highlighted the prevention piece. What are we doing to make sure that the offender, once they are released eventually, does not offend again? This is being done through a GPS monitoring system that their parole officer and the public safety department can identify. Where's this individual? Are they violating the stalking code? Are they violating the restraining order? And immediately have somebody respond to that situation. The next piece is the re-education, or hopefully a rehabilitation piece, so that a abuser goes through a batter's education course. And this not only shows them, hey, not only is this wrong, and you should know this is wrong, but we're also going to list the litany of things that can happen to you if you reoffend again, including serious prison time. So that when they get out, they don't immediately think that they can go back to their old ways.
Right.
Do you think a lot of them aren't aware of how serious it is to reoffend?
I think you're absolutely right, Lou. The challenge is that for a lot of them, they've been through the system a series of times, and they've seen that, hey, as long as I do good on the inside, I can do bad on the outside. And that's a really scary prospect, not just for the rest of society, but particularly for the victims or the would-be unknown victim who is in a situation where he or she doesn't actually recognize this person has this history. And sadly, the survivor rate in the U.S. is every 9 seconds someone is the victim of domestic abuse. Wow. So that's why I think it's so important for that last piece, the punishment piece, to truly fit the crime. Very briefly, in this situation, through our current legislation, if you've offended 3 separate times, been convicted by 3 separate judges, you would face a mandatory minimum that really puts you in a situation where you don't get to get out of prison early, no matter how good your behavior is. We would look at a absolute minimum of 85% of your prison time being served in that facility.
Wow.
Which it just seems to make sense.
Right? Absolutely.
When is this going to vote?
So we have already voted and passed it in the House. It passed with large bipartisan support. It has made it through the judiciary in the Senate. We're now looking for leaders in the Senate to take this bill up and move it through the Senate.
SoaringHearts.org for more information. Soaring Hearts.
I was going to say, as Tiffany said, reach out to your senators if you're passionate about this and want them to know your opinion.
Absolutely.
Reach out to them.
Zach, thanks you for
Jay.
what you're doing, man.
Thanks, Lou. Appreciate you guys having us on here.
And Tiffany, thank you
Thank
for
you
being
so much.
strong.
Always a
Thank you
pleasure.
so much.